Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So I've put up a few videos recently where I have had these things in the background. What are they? Well, you know, I've spoken about them before. They are Moro Krises. And one person went, I'm sorry, I haven't got your name to hand, went, Matt, why have you got like 4 Krises behind you? And because I like them. What the hell? Like, you know, very clearly I like them. That's why I stuck them on the wall. Also, for you guys, I know that you get to see my wall an awful lot, so I try and rotate what's on it and don't have the same stuff there for year in, year out. But what do I love about these Krises? Well, what's not to love about them? You may remember, so I originally got this particularly wavy bladed one a couple of months ago now, and I actually got it in from an antique auction with a bunch of other things, and at the time I didn't really think, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool, I've never had one of those, and when I got it I was like, I fucking love this, and I thought I want another one, and so I went and got other ones. Now it's interesting, I had some discussions online about the possible age and various other things about this Filipino Kris, and anyway, I won't go into that because that's probably for another more detailed video, but I did get others, and it's very interesting. So one of the things I like about having multiple weapons is that you can compare and contrast. So if you just see these in, you know, on this video on my wall, or you look at them in a book or whatever, you can't necessarily, you don't have them in hand, you can't see how big they are next to each other, how heavy they are, they've got different balances, different sort of quirks about the grip or the guard or whatever. So having 2 that you're actually able to put next to each other and compare like for like, you know, hand in hand as it were, you actually get a far better sense of the different ones. Now, I'm now going to end up with a wall with nothing on it. So one example is, look at the difference in size between these 2. So this one is pretty long. I think it's the second longest I've got, and this one is the shortest I've got. Now let's just whip out a tape measure. So this longer one, the blade is, I'm going to go metric and imperial, 22.5 inches, which is 57 centimeters. So it's pretty big, whereas the shorter one, let's have a look here. The shorter one is, come here, tape measure. I got a new tape measure because I broke my other one, because my tape measures get a lot of hard use. This one is only just under 19 inches or 48 centimeters. So 57 and 48. So, you know, they vary quite a bit, and I'm sure they varied even more than that. I'm sure there were bigger ones and there were smaller ones. And they're very different in the hand. It's funny actually, because some of them are chunkier. So if we go back to the original one here, this one is a particularly beefy and heavy one, and it's got a very wavy blade. It's notably so. Very, very wavy blade, and you'll notice the kind of extra detailed little fillers. I don't know what the Filipino word for those are at the base here. Whereas this blade is kind of flatter. I actually might do a cleaning video with this blade because I haven't touched it yet, and there's a good reason for that. I don't know if you'll be able to see in this light. Let's try and get the camera to focus on the actual blade, but that blade is very, yeah, I think you can see that on the screen, that is very definitely pattern welded. So I'm only going to clean it very, very gently. I'm showing you the cleaner side. If I flip it around to that side, you'll see that there's quite a bit of rust on the surface of this side, but this is very definitely, just focus back on my face, there we go, this is very definitely, you know, an old quality but relatively simple Kris. So we've got the bound covering on the hardwood grip there. We've got the kind of bird's beak, as it were, there. In fact, this is quite grubby. I haven't cleaned up this one at all since it came to me. Hence, I'm not really worried about handling the blade too much. But it's got a beautiful pattern welded blade, which definitely deserves cleaning up. Maybe I'll do, I think you guys, do you quite like the videos I do of cleaning stuff up? Either with or without Lucy? I think I'll do one of those, because do you know what? It's actually quite fun. A lot of the things I have need cleaning anyway, so I may as well just turn the camera on while I'm doing it, because then I'm doing 2 jobs at the same time, giving that both of these things are jobs, fun jobs, and I'm very grateful that I've got them as jobs. But anyway, so this is a smaller one and quite an old one, and you'll notice that obviously the big, great big chunky heavy one, this is the heaviest one I've got. Now the other one I pulled off first, this one, is an interesting contrast because although they've both quite long blades, in fact this one's a bit longer, this is much lighter. It's essentially just not such a thick blade. So despite the fact it is longer, and is it a bit broader? No, it's probably about the same, but it's similar-ish size but a little bit longer, but this one is actually quite a bit lighter and quite a lot more nimble. So although they superficially look similar, this one's feels very, very different in the hand. This feels, if you shut your eyes, it actually feels quite like a machete, like a typical thin-bladed garden machete like you might chop down a hedge with. Whereas this one, if I close my eyes, feels more like a gladius. This feels more like a sword. This feels more like a big knife. So this one I would say is more fragile construction. It also, you'll notice that this one has got metal wrapped kind of grip, and indeed if we go back to the pattern welded one, the pattern welded one has a metal ferrule there, ferrule to stop the end of the grip splitting when you're hitting things or people or animals. This one doesn't have that, so in a way this is a simpler, these are super sharp. Someone told me that these blades are poisoned sometimes. I'm not going to worry. Shit, this is really sharp actually. I'll talk about the blade in a second, but this one doesn't have any metal at all on the grip. So in a way you could say this is probably a simpler or more typical example. Notice this extension, unfortunately it's broken off. That would have extended quite a bit of the way up. And it gives a very particular type of grip, a bit like a Viking sword in fact. It means that this has to project past the heel of your hand there. You can't kind of hold it, let's see if I can show it. You can't kind of hold it with the heel in line with that because it would dig in. So you have to kind of sit the hand slightly to the side, which is quite interesting. I think it actually aids edge alignment, to be honest. That's what it feels like to me. And also notice, and this seems quite common with these, Chris, it's true of all of them, notice that the point droops downwards at the end, and it's true of both of those. Now that's very interesting. If in fact I use this one because it's more accentuated with this one, that means that when you're holding this kind of pistol shaped grip in the background and in here in the back, when you're holding the pistol shaped grip, it actually brings the point more online with, you know, for thrusting, but additionally it gives you an almost forward curve for chopping, a bit like a kukri or certain types of barong, things like this. So it will actually assist with the chopping force of that blow, as well as bringing the point online. And I spoke about the points of these in a Patreon video I did a few weeks ago, where I talked about the fact sometimes people go, oh, these aren't designed for thrusting because they've got rounded tips. Well, absolutely no. This is sharp, and against people, bearing in mind, in the Philippines or anywhere really in Southeast Asia, for the most part they're not going to be wearing an awful lot on their upper body or legs most of the time. So really you don't need a very pointy narrow tip, and in fact a broader edged tip like this debatably will actually do more damage going in, and importantly won't over penetrate. If you make a narrow point, it's got more risk of over penetrating. So why do I love these Krises? Well, quite simply because they're fascinating weapons. They're really cool. I just think everything about them's cool, and they feel like a proper weapon in the hand. And yeah, I just really like them. They're very distinctive. They feel like proper weapons, and they're well made. They've got an amazing level of craftsmanship in them. And I also kind of like the mystery about them as well. Like, how did they end up this particular very specific form, very characteristic? You know, it doesn't really look like any other weapon apart from the dagger sized Krises. I'll just talk about those very briefly. So what I've got here is probably 20th century example of the other type of Kris with its scabbard, and this is the type of thing that people often think about when they think about a Kris, and it is really more of a dagger, and often, as you can see here, I'm not going to do a video particularly about this, but very ornate grips, very ornate blades, amazingly kind of chiseled and stuff, and very ornate scabbards. And they're completely, whilst they're clearly a related type of weapon, we just pick up both of them, whilst they're clearly a related type of weapon, they've gone in a completely different direction. And probably for understandable reasons, I prefer the Moro version rather than this version, because these, I think, were, although I'm sure they were used as weapons, they certainly were used as weapons, they have gone more in the direction of dress accoutrements, whereas the Moro ones, whilst I'm sure that there was some degree of showing off with some of them, they're very, very much weapons. You just pick them up in the hand, you're like, yep, that's a weapon. Final thing I'll say briefly, I said I was going to talk about the blade. You'll notice that this type, some are perfectly straight, and this one has a wavy blade, but the waves in this blade are quite subtle. I'm sure they will aid with push cuts, pull cuts, and with chopping as well. Definitely make it a bit harder to sharpen, but make it more effective in the chop and in the slice. This type of blade has kind of really taken it to the extreme, and I suspect, because of the other fittings and the amount of work that's gone into the base of this blade, that what someone told me was that the number of waves in the blade and the extremity of the waves in the blade tell you something about the status of the owner of the weapon. And I think that does, to me, seem to be probably the case. I think there was a degree of showing off when you made a blade this wavy. First of all, it was harder and more expensive, therefore, to make. Didn't necessarily make it more effective, but there was a degree of showing off with this type of blade. Did it make it more effective? I don't know. I've never actually tested, so I don't know. I'm just guessing there. But I definitely think there's a status difference. This is a higher status one than this, although I would say this is probably older than this. This one maybe early 20th century, and this one is probably from around the time of the Moro kind of the Philippine War against the American space. It's probably from about the end of the 1900s, beginning of the 20th century. And finally, that one up there, this one up here is kind of similar-ish to this one. That one's actually got a slightly loose hilt, which is the reason I haven't been waving that one around like I've been waving these around. And that is something to note about these, is that the hilts, unfortunately, do get loose on them with age. The way that they're attached is they're kind of rammed onto the tang. There might be some glue or some sticky substance stuck in there to assist. And then this bar, which comes across here, sometimes you see two, sometimes there's a second one coming up here, but I think all of the examples I've got have only got one. Okay, so this bar coming up there by my index finger, or there, that basically goes to a sort of attachment point on the grip. So it's kind of anchored to the blade, as it were. So slid up the tang, and then this anchoring kind of bar comes around the side and anchors the whole thing in. It's not the world's toughest construction, and as I say, a lot of these end up with loose grips, loose handles with age. But this one's solid, and yeah, a lovely thing. But be super careful with these. Unfortunately, I never seem to get these with scabbards, these large ones, but all of the ones I've got are super sharp, so be super careful with them if you're handling them. But why do I have, going back to the original question, why do I have 4 of them on my wall? Because I really like them, they're really cool weapons. And yes, indeed, I may be selling one or two of these at some point. So keep an eye on my website, link below. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.